want to let you know that as soon as the press gives us the okay, we'll start. And while we're waiting, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, for your attendance. This is historic and very meaningful. And of course, this is not a part of the actual event. We're merely waiting on the press to give us an indication. But I want you to know that the response was absolutely fantastic, and it means a lot to know that you would take the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. We believe that this event will take approximately 2 hours. Of course, that depends on us, and I'll try as best as I can to move us along because everyone has indicated that this is a very busy day, and I respect your schedules. So I'll try as best as I can to move us along as expeditiously as possible. The event is being recorded for everyone's edification, not only by the press, but we're recording as well. And I'll explain why in just a moment. That phone ringing is a great reminder that we might put our phones on vibrate. There is no penalty for not doing so, other than people will know that it's you. So please place your phones on vibrate, if you would. And I am told that we are ready. So Raphael, would you take charge of that? Give it to Ruben or someone later on. Members of the press, if you say okay, we'll start. We good? Thank you, everyone. Please come to order. The inquiry is officially open. I'd like to ask that the persons recording the inquiry please make a note of the time that we are starting, and that time is 10:18 a.m. I'd like to thank all of you for attending this crucial inquiry. I'd like to thank our panelists for your presence. The list of invitees include the county judge and all county commissioners, the mayor and all city council members, Democratic and Republican members of Congress, as well as the Texas Low-Income Information Service, Texas Housers. I assume that all would be here today but for timing and/or prior commitments. The purpose of this crucial inquiry is to consider recent decisions by the Texas General Land Office. We know that Hurricane Harvey was a natural disaster of epic proportions. Sadly, today the question we must ask is whether GLO's inequitable allocation of funds will create a man-made disaster of similar proportions. As many of you know, the Texas General Land Office recently announced its decision not to award any community development block grant mitigation funding to Houston or Harris County. Thereafter, the GLO announced $750 million to Harris County. The inquiry will examine a decision to deny Houston and Harris County an equitable portion of the $4.3 billion allocated to Texas by Congress through Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Funds, known as CDBG-MIT. Harris County is the only county in the state of Texas that has experienced 3 consecutive years of flooding disasters in 2015, 2016, and 2017. Hurricane Harvey inundated Harris County with 1 trillion gallons of water in just 4 days. Hurricane Harvey was directly responsible for at least 68 deaths, causing approximately $125 billion in damages across the state. Does the GLO's withholding of funds from Houston and Harris County present a potential civil rights violation? This inquiry may shed possible legal light on this question. What will the effects of GLO's inequitable distribution be on the people who have suffered and continue to suffer? This inquiry can shed some light on this as well. This inquiry is being recorded, and a summary of the findings will be sent to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The inquiry's findings will also be reported to the House Financial Services Committee, which has jurisdiction over the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Congress. I do not wish to politicize the needs of our constituents. Hurricane Harvey was not a Democratic disaster, nor was it a Republican flood. The General Land Office's initial action plan was submitted and approved under the Trump administration, not the Bidens. Whether by intent or by accident, it is Commissioner Bush who is politicizing the needs of our constituents by casting blame on the Biden administration. GLO must amend its action plan and include an equitable allocation of funding to Houston and Harris County for disaster relief. As of yesterday, this appears not to have been done. The fate, hopes, and dreams of the suffering are in the hands of one man. I'm especially grateful to the staff who helped us prepare for this historic event, without whom the event would not be possible. I'm grateful to all members of the press for your attendance today. Now, I'm going to give just a few more instructions, and then I will be yielding to my colleague for opening statement. Colleagues, we will have approximately 4 minutes to give our opening statements. Thereafter, we will proceed to hear from witnesses. I will introduce the witnesses, and each witness will be given an amount of time that I will announce at the time they are introduced. 5 minutes for each witness. With this said, please allow me to introduce now my colleague who serves with me on the Financial Services Committee. She and I are on a committee of jurisdiction for this event. She is from the 29th Congressional District. Her committee assignments include the Committee on Financial Services, as well as the Committee on the Judiciary. I present now for her 5 minutes, Representative Garcia of the 29th Congressional District.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to make a few opening remarks. And first of all, I want to thank you for all your efforts in hosting this inquiry today and for putting us all together. And it's important, I think, that we note that invitations were extended to all levels of government in terms of officials and, of course, to the General Office itself. This is about an inquiry. This is about making sure that we know exactly what happened and why we would have been left out in the initial premature allocations that were announced. Despite previous federal disaster relief dollars being dispersed to Houston and Harris County after Ike, after Maria, and other funding streams from Hurricane Harvey relief, now suddenly GLO Commissioner George P. Bush has decided that Harris County and Houston do not need critical community development block grant mitigation relief dollars. This is nonsense. In 2017, in response to Hurricane Harvey, Maria, and other disasters, Houston and Harris County received $1.3 billion in community development block grant dollars. Those disaster relief dollars certainly helped, and now it's time for Houston to receive its fair and equitable share of CDBG mitigation relief dollars. There's no question that Houston and Harris County families were hit hard after Hurricane Harvey, and we still haven't recovered. Some estimates suggest that our area suffered about $62 billion, that's billion with a B, in estimated statewide damage from Hurricane Harvey. People still need help. During my experience in state and local government, the Texas General Land Office often put partisanship before the well-being of families, but not to this extent. Never have I seen before Houston and Harris County be left out. I brought this up yesterday in a call with reporters, but it's worth noting again. When I served in the Texas Senate, I served on the Intergovernmental Relations Committee the whole time I was there. In that committee, I heard testimony from GLO about the disaster mitigation funds. After hearing GLO's testimony, the committee made recommendations to the GLO. In one recommendation, we asked the General Office to, quote, assist to the extent possible local political subdivisions with facilitating immediate, and we underlined immediate, disaster recovery federal and state government responsibility, including accounting and damage assessments. They're supposed to be there to help immediately. Remember, this was back in 2016. He's been in office. Clearly, this is a long-standing problem, and GLO has not listened. He has not figured it out yet. So unfortunately, the shenanigans are not gone. They're not new. But the outright exclusion of Houston and Harris County by GLO from well-deserved federal dollars is not new. I'm baffled by the fact that Commissioner Bush thinks it's okay to withhold necessary aid to our families. This is not a partisan issue. This is about rebuilding our communities in a fair and equitable way. I will yield back to my colleagues, and I want to thank all the witnesses in advance for being here to give us our views, which we'll then take back to Washington and work on this immediately. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from the 18th Congressional District. Her committee assignments are the Committee on Judiciary and the Committee on Homeland Security, among others. I now yield to Congresswoman Jackson Lee.
Good morning, and thank you to the chair and the host and co-host. I'm delighted to be a co-host of this inquiry and to join with my colleagues on a very important message and ability for action here on behalf of our constituents, Houston and Harris County. First, I'd like to be very clear that the Texas General Land Office had no authority, and say it again, no authority to make any announcements to any government entity or the public regarding the awarding of flood mitigation dollars from Hurricane Harvey Disaster Federal Fund mitigation appropriations. The agreement that HUD and the state of Texas entered into requires that plans of flood mitigation funding distribution must receive approval by HUD, which the state has not sought to do at this point in a way that allowed the complete knowledge and public comment. Any suggestion that this was true and that this was a fault of the Biden administration is not true. The General Land Office should make available the agreement with the Department of Housing and Urban Development so that everyone can know and understand what the state's obligations are for meeting the agreement it has. 21 trillion gallons of water fell during Hurricane Harvey, and at the midst of that, was glad to have my colleagues join me in the submission of a $174 billion request for this region. Though it wasn't $174 billion that was ultimately distributed, we did have a major infusion of dollars from the federal government that recognized the devastation that we have faced. In addition, let me thank the local governments, those who are present here today, Mayor Turner, Judge Hidalgo, Commissioner Ellis, and others who focused on the need for dealing with our social vulnerable communities, language in the HUD legal terminology. With that in mind, it is shocking that as GLO announced over $1 billion in community development block grant mitigation dollars just recently made available from the Housing and Urban Development, with the real understanding that those who suffered the most damage should receive certainly the most aid. I represent portions of Jacinto City and Humble, Texas, and so I'm grateful that our small cities are responded to as well. But we must be very clear that the intent of Congress was to ensure that where the damage was most, that you would have the opportunity to be cured. Shockingly, neither the City of Houston nor Harris County, which includes the city, were awarded any of these CDBG MIT awarded funds, even though both the city and county diligently, with documentation, submitted applications for this funding, and despite the fact that our region suffered almost 50% of all damages attributed to Harvey, one of the costliest and destructive storms in our nation's history. This outcome is unacceptable. When I landed yesterday from Washington, I drove to one of the hardest hit areas of my constituency. I drove off of 59 and Tidwell to the Lake Forest area, right on the backside of one of our bayous. I can assure you that the construction or the damage that happened in 2017 is evident. There is certainly work being done on the bayous, thanks to our local officials, combined with federal funds. But you can still see the remnants of the impact on our communities. That means that we're desperately in need of multifamily and single-family homes. It is again shocking to find out that process did not go forward in this distribution. It is also our understanding, which we'll be submitting a letter on this, that the GLO will seek approval from HUD to allocate $750 million of additional CDBG MIT funds allocated to GLO from HUD directly to Harris County. I would imagine that that should not go forward without the appropriate input of our community leaders, our elected leaders. Finally, let me ask to submit into the record a letter directed to Commissioner Bush on June 30th, 2020. In part, this letter begins, but I am writing to request the Texas General Land Office to begin direct allocation of homeowners assistance, multifamily rental, and economic revitalization program funds to the City of Houston instead of administering them on behalf of the city. That had been an ongoing conflict, and of course we understand that negotiations ultimately resolved. But the outrage at that time was that the city was prepared to handle those dollars, and they were not forthcoming. We have the damage. We have people who are hurting. We have people who died, as well as some of our surrounding areas. But it seems appalling that you can, in this instance, discriminate, deny, and eliminate the federal funds that waiting Texans who live in Harris County and Houston have been desperately in need of. I'm very grateful for this inquiry. We will look forward to determine whether there are civil rights violations and or issues that may go beyond that. The most important point is the people of this community are hurting, they're in need, and we must join with our local elected officials in helping to solve those problems. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank you for your courtesy.
The gentlelady yields. The chair will now yield 5 minutes to the representative from the 7th Congressional District. Her committee assignments are House Committee on Energy and Commerce, House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I now yield to Representative Fletcher for your 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Congressman Green, for convening this inquiry today, for inviting me to participate in the work that you and Congresswoman Garcia are doing on behalf of our community and the Financial Services Committee. I'm really grateful to be a part of this, and I'm really grateful to our witnesses who are here today, both for being here to share their thoughts and also for their incredible leadership across our community through Hurricane Harvey and the years since, and this committed work to continuing the efforts to get the relief funds that we need. As you indicated, our delegation has worked together on these disaster recovery issues in a bipartisan way since Hurricane Harvey in 2017. That is reflected in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 that allocated these funds. And we've continued our work together, and I think it's really important to know that our Commissioners Court, our City Council, and everyone here in Houston and Harris County has been united in this response to the announcement from the GLO. So I think that it's really important for us to remember what our community has experienced, and also what the intent of Congress was in allocating these funds, as of course my colleagues who were in the 115th Congress that allocated these funds know personally, and as we have discussed more recently again in Congress with people throughout our delegation. So I want to thank you for all of your work and for bringing us together today to make sure that we have the resources and the partnerships we need to rebuild and recover following Harvey's devastation. And I think it bears repeating what Congresswoman Garcia said. The amount of damages in Houston and Harris County is really record-setting. You know, Hurricane Harvey was the second costliest disaster in United States history, with an estimated $125 billion in damages. That's more than any other disaster in U.S. history other than Hurricane Katrina. And in my district on the west side of Houston, people suffered tremendous damage, some for the second time in 2 years and some for the third time in 2 years. So we have seen both the devastation and the efforts to rebuild and recover, but we've also seen that people are still concerned when it rains that it could happen again. And that's what these mitigation dollars were designed to help us overcome. It is absolutely essential that we get to the bottom of the decisions that were made, and that we get the input and continued support from people across our district. I'm grateful to you for inviting everyone from Commissioners Court and City Council to participate, and I hope that those who aren't able to appear today will be able to submit written testimony for the record so that we can get a full picture of the unity of our Commissioners Court, of our City Council, and our congressional delegation in fighting for our community and ensuring that we get the resources that we need. What we've seen across Houston and Harris County has been an incredible unified response, and it's the response that we deserve. It's one that I'm committed to working with you on, and I really am grateful to you for working on this in the Financial Services Committee, which is of course the committee of jurisdiction over the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and also in ensuring that that conversations with the administration are ongoing as well, to make sure that we can resolve this issue as quickly as possible. So I thank you for your efforts. I'm glad to be here and participate in this inquiry today, and I will yield back.
The gentlelady yields, and the chair will now, without objection, accept into the record the request of the gentlelady from the 18th Congressional District. At this time, the chair is going to recognize for 5 minutes the Harris County Judge, Judge Lena Hidalgo. You are now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you to our congressional delegation. Congressman Green and Congresswoman Garcia, Congresswoman Fletcher, Congresswoman Lee, thank you for inviting me today. Since I took office in January 2019, each of you have been tireless, reliable partners in our work to build a stronger and more prosperous county, and I want to thank you for that. I'd like to begin my testimony by sharing the story of Sergeant Steve Perez, a veteran of the Houston Police Department. On the morning of Sunday, August 27th, as Hurricane Harvey began its slow and deadly march over Harris County, Sergeant Perez did what thousands of other brave first responders did during the storm. He went to work. With the rain barreling down across the county, his wife, Cheryl, was concerned about the weather and asked him to stay home. But as he did each day during his 34 years at HPD, he chose duty above all, and he went to work anyway. When he didn't arrive for his regular roll call the next day, his fellow officers grew worried. They found him in his patrol vehicle. He drowned in floodwaters under an underpass near the Hardy Toll Road in Beltway 8, just 2 days away from his 61st birthday. The tragic loss of Sergeant Perez was just one of the 68 fatalities from Hurricane Harvey statewide, 36 of which took place right here in Harris County. Sadly, we bore more than just a disproportionate impact of fatalities. We also suffered the most damage compared to any other jurisdiction in Texas. More than half of the 300,000 homes damaged or destroyed across the state during Harvey were right here in Harris County. Each of those structures has a family or a story, a lifetime of wealth built up in it, a family business unique to our county, or a workplace people rely on to make a living. We're a big county, roughly 5 million people, the geographic size of the state of Rhode Island. Not only are we the largest jurisdiction in Texas, but Harris County, along with the city of Houston, are also the economic engine for much of the Southwest United States, the epicenter of our national energy infrastructure. For these reasons, it is mind-boggling to understand how we as a county received $0 in the latest round of funding for CDBG mitigation funds. We're pleased 4 smaller cities within Harris County received around $90 million for some important projects, but those funds don't come anywhere near close to meeting our countywide need or expectation for federal funds. The people of Harris County don't care about action plans or appropriations or competition rules or which agency is the source of the funds. They care about results. And that's why I'll continue fighting for every dollar we can receive, regardless of where it comes from. That's why I joined Mayor Turner in asking Secretary Fudge for certainty in an allocation to Houston and to Harris County, and for a review of the criteria used. Harris County's position is that certainty in funding allocation is most important. We understand that the Texas GLO plans to amend its action plan to name Harris County as a direct subrecipient of $750 million in CDBG mitigation funding. That's great. We're asking that HUD approve this amendment, subject to our review of the action plan, as a down payment toward an equitable share for all government entities within Harris County. We recognize more funding is necessary. We support the City of Houston's request for an additional $1 billion, and we will continue asking for additional funding for the City of Houston and for Harris County. Look, we're doing our part. A year after Hurricane Harvey, voters overwhelmingly approved a $2.5 billion bond to put our local dollars to work. We're putting skin in the game, but we need active and good partners in the state and federal government. Harris County residents will never forget this catastrophe. A storm so destructive it will take us a generation to truly recover from. We will never forget people calling 911 from their roofs in the middle of the night, families who worked their lifetimes to invest in homes. That is the conclusion of my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Judge. We will now recognize the Mayor of the City of Houston for 5 minutes. Mr. Mayor Turner, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Congressman Green, Congressman Garcia, Congresswoman Garcia, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and Congresswoman Fletcher. and to all of my colleagues here, and I'm honored to be sitting here with Judge Lena Dago, County Commissioner, and City Council members as well. In 2017, Houston and the greater Houston region experienced one of the costliest and most devastating storms that has reached our shores. Houston and Harris County alone experienced nearly 50% of the damages statewide. While Houstonians are continuing to learn how to adapt and build resilience through past extreme weather events, we cannot do it alone. The Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 directed the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to allocate no less than $12 billion for mitigation activities. These funds were to be distributed to support resilience building efforts proportional to amounts received from the CDBG DRA program for 2015, 2016, and 2017 disasters. In the past 6 years, Houston has experienced 7 federally declared disasters. In addition to the floods, our communities were impacted by the Winter Storm Uri in 2021. This year, hurricane season started earlier. Our climate impact assessment released in August of 2020 indicates that climate events will only continue to threaten our region with more extreme rainfall events. Our new model with the new precipitation data issued by NOAA has only expanded our floodplains and showed that our systems will need to handle more water. Houston and Harris County alone received nearly 50% of the funds distributed through the CDBG DRA program, which focus on housing programs. For infrastructure and hazard mitigation, Houston and Harris County alone received nearly 50% in total project funding from FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, administered by TDM as the lead state agency. Both of these programs have enabled the city and county to implement recovery programs that protect the most vulnerable and better prepare them for the next storm. Yet, for the CDBG MIT, the MID program, to date, Houston has received 0. It is as if Hurricane Harvey did not hit the city of Houston. I find that highly disturbing. Harris County received a small amount, which was specifically to smaller municipalities. This begs the question, why the most populous city in the state's economic engine, home to the largest port in the United States, home to the largest medical center in the world, has been left out of this program meant to protect, build forward, and help adapt to this intensifying climate risk. The reality is, but for the storm hitting Houston and Harris County, the $4.3 billion would not be coming to the state of Texas at all. Investments in the regions have taken place. Policies have been updated and continue to be to ensure Houstonians are protected. Green development is encouraged, but Houston cannot do it alone. Recovery will only be successful, as we have learned in the past, by ensuring government at all levels collaborate. Specifically, $4.3 billion was set aside for the state of Texas. As the lead agency that interacts with HUD, the GLO was set to administer these funds. Only $2.1 billion of the $4.3 billion total mitigation funds have been set aside for the Hurricane Harvey state mitigation competition statewide. But this competition limits applicants to 3 applications with another 3 partnership applications. Other program funding, the $2.2 billion, has been allocated to 2015 floods statewide, coastal resilient efforts, hazard mitigation planning, administration, and council of governments. However, these do not allocate any funding, and I underscore any funding, directly to the city of Houston. The city did continuously caution the GLO on the issues of proportionality, as well as the challenges presented with the proposed program criteria. It was clear that the programs as drafted by GLO would not meet the needs of larger municipalities, penalizing denser areas. In comments submitted to the GLO in December of 2019 and in January of 2020, the city's chief recovery officer and myself described how the state's plan will leave Houstonians and people in Harris County woefully short in receiving the proportional share of the HUD MID dollars. However, more funding for mitigation projects would help communities to better adapt to extreme hazards. All of the warnings that we provided in 2019 and 2020 were ignored by GLO. Houston Public Works developed applications for flood risk mitigation projects that achieved the goals established by HUD. When you look at the dollars received, that was issued by GLO, there is no way you can explain the $0 coming to the city of Houston. And let me conclude simply by saying, while the city was awarded for a smaller project for 2016 floods, in the first tranche of the Harvey funds, $0 were allocated for the city of Houston projects. These projects had all favorable benefit cost ratios and were selected to benefit the communities most vulnerable with the highest flood risk. City projects were located in historically underrepresented areas and complete communities: Fifth Ward and Market Square, Cashmere Gardens, South Park and Sunnyside, Pleasantville, and Huntington Village. The proposed improvements included in each project application were developed to provide substantial flood risk reductions upon completion, while also accommodating future city projects. When you look at the scoring mechanism used by GLO, it was destined from the very beginning that the city of Houston and Harris County would end up, in this case, with $0 of the $4.3 billion. How you justify it, I do not know. But what I do know is that time is not on our side. And what I do know is that GLO has decided to take its time to submit its amended state action plan because there is no specific timeline allowed. And so today, the county judge and I submitted another letter to the Secretary of HUD requesting that she request that GLO submit its amended state action plan within the next 30 days. Otherwise, we will be waiting forever, but the storms will keep coming. Thank you.
Let me make a brief announcement before we go to our next panelist. We have, since the hearing started, received a communique from GLO. I have called it to the attention of the county judge. I'm calling it to your attention. We will make copies of the letter that was sent to us, in fact, 2 letters. And if you so desire, you may have an opportunity to comment on the letter. Mayor, you've already given your testimony, but I will extend the time without objection for you to have an additional opportunity to speak on the letter itself if you so choose. And all other members of the panel will have a similar opportunity. I regret that the letter was only given to us after the hearing started. If we had it earlier, we would have distributed it earlier, but we did not get it. So with this said, we will now move to the commissioner from Precinct 1, Commissioner Rodney Ellis, for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman and Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and Congresswoman Fletcher. This is an important congressional inquiry, and we appreciate you being here. Mr. Chairman, you've let me testify before your full committee on 2 times, and I did not follow the time schedule. I will follow it today. The mayor and the county judge have so eloquently stated most of what I want to say, so I'm just going to summarize a few points. One, Harris County, including the city of Houston, account for nearly half of the assessed damage. They said it, but it bears repeating again. When the federal government allocated this funding to the state, they prioritized the most populous and hardest hit city and county in that calculation. Yet, GLO announced its initial CDBG MIT awards. It provided 0 to Harris County and the city of Houston. Commissioner Bush has wrongly placed the blame on the federal government for not providing Harris County sufficient flood mitigation funding. The federal government, and specifically HUD's guidance, grants states significant discretion to decide how to spend this CDBG mitigation money. The GLO scoring criteria disadvantages low-income neighborhoods in large jurisdictions. The GLO scoring criteria consider data for the entire jurisdiction where a project is located instead of the affected area. The GLO award points based on the percent of residents in a jurisdiction that would be impacted by the project. This hurts Harris County, the largest county in the state of 4.7 million people, larger, might I add, than 25 states. The GLO also considered, as one of your colleagues mentioned, the social vulnerability index and the per capita market value in the jurisdiction, at the jurisdictional level. The income inequalities within Houston and Harris County mask the high social vulnerability in many of the neighborhoods that most need and would benefit most from mitigation projects. Had GLO established a scoring criteria that simply focus on the residents in areas served by proposed projects, low-income residents in and beyond Harris County and the city of Houston would be in a better position today. I want to stress to you that storms like Harvey, according to a Rice at the University of Pittsburgh study between 1999 and 2013, natural disasters increased Houston's racial wealth gap by $87,000. And we are seeing this same pattern play out in GLO's allocation even beyond Harris County. My panelists to my left, Texas Houses, did a great Title VI complaint. Rarely would I read the entire thing, but one section just stood out so much. I hope I'm not taking the thunder from you. But the city of Beaumont has been subject to widespread repetitive property damage for many disasters. I think the largest amount of rainfall there went in Port Arthur as opposed to Houston, which is in Jefferson County. Beaumont has a population of almost 120,000 people, a poverty rate of 22%, and the largest share of African Americans of any major city in Texas. Beaumont did not receive any mitigation funding from GLO, nada. Port Arthur did not receive any mitigation funding. Jefferson County did not receive any mitigation funding. However, a bedroom community in an adjacent county, the city of Vidor, which is 90% white, was awarded by GLO $15 million to improve storm drainage. I'm happy for Vidor, and I hope that Vidor has overcome its past. I remember as a child seeing the billboard. It was called a sundown city. That meant if you looked like me, you had to get out before the sun set. The inequities that we're talking about are not just data points. They result in families losing their homes and flooding and worrying about their safety every time there's a heavy rain on the horizon. Here's what we're asking for, and my colleagues have stated it. Congress and HUD and any appropriate congressional committee ask GLO to be accountable. Ask HUD to investigate GLO administration and HUD CDBG mitigation funding. And after that, have HUD approve allocations that are consistent with the intent of the federal legislation, equitable and proportional to the number of people affected by the damage in a non-discriminatory manner. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. We will now hear from the commissioner from Precinct 2, Adrian Garcia. Commissioner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Congressman Green. I also want to take point of personal privilege in recognizing my member of Congress, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, and my dear friend, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and my next dear friend, Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. I want to thank you all for your leadership, and Mayor, thank you as well. I know that Judge Hidalgo just spoke, and Commissioner Ellis, thank you for always being the advocate of equity at Commissioner's Court and throughout the state of Texas, if not the country. And thank you for this opportunity, Congressman Green, to share our experience about the Texas General Land Office's terrible decision to snub Houston and Harris County from Harvey flood mitigation funds. When my office staff met with the GLO, never in our wildest dreams would we have expected to learn that not a single dollar was coming to Harris County nor Houston. We did know going in that the scoring system would severely limit Houston and Harris' ability to get what we were owed. Members, previous speakers, like we just heard from Mayor Turner and Commissioner Ellis, have already testified to the flaws of the GLO scoring system, that our area would be punished for being an attractive place to live, work, and raise a family, and that we would be swimming upstream to get our fair share. I'd like to speak in more plain terms. If you go around other parts of the state or the country and you ask people with no skin in the game, what do they remember about Hurricane Harvey? My guess is that most would mention that it was a terrible storm, but more specifically, that it was a hurricane that hit the Houston area. I've spoken with business leaders from other parts of the country who shared how that event changed the way they do business with our region. Some indicated that Harvey had them rethinking whether or not to locate their business in our area for fear of another event like Harvey, since they know of our chronic flooding reputation. What people remember from afar, and what we know here locally, is that Harvey was almost entirely a Houston and Harris County event. Obviously, that's not to minimize the damage that happened in other parts of the Gulf Coast. However, it's just a plain fact that Hurricane Harvey dumped record rainfall in our area. So back to the GLO. Now, after a broad bipartisan outcry, we had at Commissioners Court around 50 people from all walks of life, Republicans, Democrats, consultants, and residents, call into Commissioners Court to unanimously express outrage about what happened. Now, all of a sudden, Commissioner Bush wants to pay us off with $750 million and expect us to be content. Well, here's the problem. $750 million is probably about a quarter of what we need, and he has not yet said what the city of Houston is to get. I'll not let him try to pit us against one another. Houston and Harris County need to be made whole. Additionally, whatever he is proposing won't get here anytime soon. Not to mention that if he could so magically tell HUD to give Harris County a direct allocation, then why did he not suggest that when then President Trump was assembling the nearly $5 billion package that would ultimately be given to the state to distribute? He should have advocated for our direct allocation all along. And so, no, I will not stop talking about how wrong this decision was, coupled with the fact that we were told that if the local community pitched in, that it would make our proposals much more attractive. And so we went to our voters and advocated for a $2.5 billion flood bond package that was approved. Commissioner Bush should have told us then to ask for our voters to flip for the entire bill if it was their intention to exclude us all along. And Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, you know all too well that East Harris County is the downstream of Fort Bend, Waller, Montgomery, Liberty, Summit Chambers, and Harris County. And so the lack of funding is critical to the quality of life in East Harris County and Precinct 2 in particular. So altogether, with you all, we are prepared to show how Houston and Harris County are truly strong and strong together, and prove that no matter what, we won't stop fighting for the people we serve to get what they deserve. And with that, I yield my remarks. Thank you very much.
The gentleman yields. At this time, we'll hear from the city councilman, Mr. David Robinson. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Congressman Green and Congresswomen Garcia, Jackson Lee, and Fletcher. It is indeed an honor to be with you today, along with our mayor and these great commissioners that we have from Harris County. I wanted to just reiterate some of those statistics that we've heard so far, to share my absolute frustration with what has happened in the wake of the GLO decision. First of all, the plain fact that has been stated repeatedly of the single most devastating rain event, the most rain that we have had in the history of the United States, 60 inches in 4 days from our Hurricane Harvey. When it visited us on August 25th and the days that followed of 2017. As has been said, the CDBG dollars, $62 billion, is simply required to come to what has impacted this area. Hurricane Harvey was the second most costly event in the history of the United States, second only to Hurricane Katrina, of course, that struck in New Orleans in the fall of 2005. And that, as the facts have been relayed today, it is of great frustration that we are simply not receiving our fair share. I want to reflect on a couple of personal memories and observations from the time that immediately followed Harvey. And Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, I would love for you to remember the moment that we assembled in the George R. Brown Convention Center and how ironic it was at that time. It was actually a photograph that I made of you and our Senator Cruz, who were with us together. You were wearing red, he was wearing blue, and it was a remarkable coming together of a bipartisan, uniform support of this historic event. That famously bipartisan event was hosted with the City Council there. So for those of you who have served our city, Congresswoman Garcia as our controller, and certainly you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, as a former council member for Houston, we understand how important it is to have all levels of government responding. And that's what we're doing here today. It was not long after that day at the George R. Brown, Congresspeople, that I was on a boat on Lake Houston with Commissioner Bush. There it was on the edge of District E, I beg your pardon. It was not so much the rainfall that devastated them, but the flash flood that came down from Lake Conroe. And we have been needing to work on these efforts. That was absolutely devastating to District E, as it was in so many other corners of the city of Houston. So calling that to our attention, the next in the events that I remember clearly was being in Washington advocating for the package that was promised, that close to $5 billion that came down. And again, Congresswoman, you recall we were in your office. It was a bipartisan delegation from the city of Houston that included the late Councilmember Larry Green. It included Councilmember Amanda Edwards. It included Brenda Stardig from District A, and the at-large council member Jack Christie. 5 of us were there in your office as you departed for the floor of the House of Representatives to let folks know the need. And that money came in just a few days after our return to Houston. So I want to thank you for that. For the city of Houston, currently I'm joined here by my colleagues, Councilmember Abby Kamen, Councilmember Tarsha Jackson, and so many others have strong opinions about where we are. I do chair the TTI committee, and that I stands for infrastructure. Infrastructure is what we need to do for mitigation of future events. This has been an incredible run these last few years with those 5 and 7, to the mayor's point, natural disasters that have been declared in our region. I do want to speak of the importance of legislation that's also just come out of Austin, sits on the governor's desk, the creation of the Gulf Coast Protection District. And I know, Congressmember Fletcher, that you're working very hard on that, and we very much appreciate what you're doing. The Galveston Bay Park Plan, that is a scheme and an idea for further mitigation in our Gulf, needs to be anticipated for the next storm that's coming. So while we work for our appropriate bipartisan, unified amount of dollars from the GLO, we need to be continuing to work on bipartisan efforts. As been said, a bipartisan, unified response is what is necessary. As our mayor has said, Harvey did not discriminate. The rain fell on everybody. We need relief for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields. We will now hear from Councilwoman Abby Kamen.
Good morning. Congresswoman Jackson Lee, Congressman Green, Congresswoman Garcia, and Congresswoman Fletcher, thank you for inviting me to speak before you today alongside my esteemed colleagues and for ensuring that our communities are not forgotten. I have the privilege of representing over 200,000 people in some of the city's neighborhoods hardest hit by flooding, including the greater Meyerland area in the southwest part of town and Congresswoman Fletcher's district as well. At least 2,394 homes in this one area flooded during Harvey. For so many, this was not the first time, but the third or fourth in as many years. Houston and Harris County not only made up close to half of the statewide losses during Harvey, we are the only major city that has experienced consecutive flooding disasters, making the CDBG mitigation dollars we're discussing today vital for us to build back stronger and more resilient. We've made great progress in partnership with the county on infrastructure improvements, including Project Braze. This was in large part thanks to FEMA and other federal funding opportunities. I use this as an example of what's working and the importance of federal assistance in our community. But there are tremendous unmet needs for flood mitigation that are directly tied to Harvey recovery. These funds are critical for the future of our neighborhoods. The state's intentional efforts to deprive Houstonians of millions of dollars specifically designated for localities hardest hit by Harvey is indefensible. No matter which way you slice it, the formula the GLO used does not add up. The state clearly strayed from proportional distribution models it previously followed in doling out federal Harvey funds. For example, when it came to housing recovery funds, HUD recommended the city and county each receive 25% of the overall allocation, given our area made up close to half of the statewide damage during Harvey. The state stayed in line with HUD's recommendation and gave a direct CDBG allocation of 50%. With FEMA hazard mitigation grants, our area received about 40% of the funds. Now the state has unjustifiably diverted from the standard that they themselves set. This is not the first time the GLO has interfered with recovery programs so many Houstonians depend on. During the state takeover of the homeowner assistance program here towards the end of last year, they demanded the city turn over reimbursement program applications that greatly impacted my district. They assumed control, though, with no reimbursement program of their own, effectively terminating the program. This would have left households in my district with no recourse after these families had emptied their savings and retirement accounts, spent thousands out of pocket relying on this program for reimbursement. I will be submitting for the record my letter to the GLO on this from last fall as well. I had to fight to ensure GLO provided funding to make Houstonians whole and appreciate Congresswoman Fletcher's help with that. That was for individual households. This morning we're talking about large-scale infrastructure that will protect thousands of families in their homes while saving taxpayer dollars in the long run. FEMA research shows that each dollar spent on mitigation saves an average of $4. My constituents do not care whether flood relief comes from the state, the county, or the city. What matters is that they aren't mired in an unjust situation. The state cherry-picked numbers to exclude Houston, period. While I respectfully ask for an investigation, above all, I implore our federal government to ensure dollars come to Houston and Harris County. This is a pattern of intentional hostility and discrimination towards Houstonians, and I'm extremely concerned about the thousands of families once again being harmed, this time by the state's decision to withhold critical infrastructure dollars. These are the people these funds are supposed to help. As the chair of Houston's Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, and even more so as a Houstonian, I find myself once again holding my breath as we have started this year's hurricane season. The longer we delay because of politics, the longer we remain in danger. And as the mayor said, we are already on borrowed time. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields. At this time, we will now hear from the Councilwoman Natasha Jackson. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Representative Green, Congresswoman Lee, Garcia, and Fletcher, for inviting me to be part of this panel calling out our state for neglecting Houston, a decision that will be felt most acutely by districts and people of color. It is an accepted concept that storms don't discriminate, but I'm here to tell you that they do. They do discriminate. Recently, Houston had some rainy days, and my office was flooded with calls from people whose streets were underwater, who had their homes flooded, who had sewage backed up into their homes, and open ditches full of water days after the rain had stopped. It doesn't take a storm of Harvey's magnitude to wreak havoc on our neighborhoods. GLOW also discriminate by giving preference to properties with fewer people and higher property values. They very directly told many of my low-income constituents that they don't matter. And unfortunately, it is not the first time they've heard this. My hope was that money from Harvey recovery would finally address the needs, many needs of my district and the Houston and Harris County, needs that have been neglected for many decades. My hope now is that President Biden and his administration will stop this injustice of GLOW. By communities of District B, Houston, and Harris County, we deserve more. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields, and I'm going to acknowledge that in just a moment we'll receive additional testimony from persons who've had an opportunity to peruse the 2 letters that we have. But at this time, we're going to continue with testimony. It will give you an additional amount of time to peruse the letters. At this time, we will hear from the representative from the Texas Housers. For edification purposes, Texas Housers is a nonprofit affordable housing research and advocacy organization. Founded in 1988, the organization has offices in Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. Texas Housers has worked extensively with survivors to secure fairness and racial equity across Texas in the recovery from Hurricanes Rita, Dolly, Ike, and Harvey. At this time, Attorney David Wheaton, who represents Texas Housers today, will be heard for 5 minutes. You're now recognized, sir.
Thank you so much, and I'm going to try to keep my comments brief. But first, thank you, Congressman Green, Congresswoman Garcia, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and Congresswoman Fletcher for inviting Texas Housers to this inquiry. First, the GLO has announced its intent to award CDBG mitigation funds in a manner that is systematically and deliberately advantages white individuals and predominantly white communities, while systematically and deliberately denying low and moderate income African American and Hispanic individuals and communities equal access to these federal funds. The GLO's actions harms people of color directly by depriving them of assistance to rebuild homes damaged in disasters in a manner and in locations that will make them less susceptible to future disasters, depressing the economic value of their homes and subjecting them to disproportionate physical hazards and property damage that will result from future flooding and other disasters, and by perpetuating historical discrimination and disinvestment that has made these persons and communities disproportionately vulnerable to disasters. In addition, a number of the criteria and priorities established by the GLO have a discriminatory, desperate impact based on race and national origin. These criteria include eligibility standards, scoring criteria which disadvantage low and moderate income populations that should instead be prioritized. These these counties, rather than CDBG, MIT benefits areas determine allocations using criteria that disadvantage urban areas with larger populations of African American and Hispanic population, establishing preferences for homeownership benefits without assuring similar protections for program beneficiaries who are renters, who in Texas are disproportionately African American and Hispanic. Among the large areas of Texas harmed by the GLO allocation and assessment are Harris County, Jefferson, and Orange counties in southeast Texas, the Rio Grande Valley County of Hidalgo, and the cities of Houston, Port Arthur, and Beaumont. All these areas have large populations of low-income persons and African American and Hispanic persons impacted by many disasters and who comprise the largest share of these populations within the areas eligible for CDBG mitigation funds. In conclusion, in its efforts to avoid funding people of color, it is our belief that the GLO has ignored or violated multiple provisions of the federal regulation governing the administration of the CDBG mitigation funds that are intended by HUD to protect citizens from discrimination, not cause further discrimination. Thank you so much.
The gentleman yields. Mayor, if you and the commissioner would come back, we'll have you, and Abby, you may stay if you want to take another. All right, wherever you'd like to sit. We will now engage in Q&A. And Councilwoman, of course you can stay at the dais. You may stay as well, sir. I'll start with questions. Thereafter, I'll yield to other members. I'd like to call to your attention, if I may, what I see as a contradiction. And while it's a simple contradiction, it's still a contradiction. I find the letter to be somewhat offensive, to be quite candid. But before I give my final comments, I'm going to ask just one question, and then I'll be yielding to Congresswoman Garcia. Let's take a look, if you would please, at the letter dated June 10th, 2021. And if you'll move over to the very last paragraph, you'll find in the very next to the last sentence this language. Commissioner Bush sent a letter to Secretary Fudge on May 27th, 2021, requesting a direct allocation of $750 million to Harris County. The letter is included for reference. I believe this to be the letter. It also indicates, to date, we have not received a response from HUD. Let's move to the letter. The letter says, in the first, second, third, fourth paragraph on its only page, in print that is in bold, reads, however, based on the amount of Hurricane Harvey damage suffered and overall population affected in Harris County, I will be submitting an action plan amendment to HUD. I think I should read this again, because while one letter says he has submitted it, and he references this letter as the letter wherein the submission has been made, he says that he will be submitting the plan. I have to take that to mean that he hasn't submitted it to HUD, requesting approval for a direct allocation to Harris County for $750 million. For clarity purposes, we have one letter dated June 10th, 2021, this letter indicating that the letter that I have dated May 27th is supposed to have his request. So I'm not sure that the request has been made, is the point to be made. He may intend to make the request. If it has been made, then the letter itself is in contradiction with his second letter. With this said, I'm going to yield to the mayor. Mayor, you have had an opportunity to peruse these documents, but very briefly, I don't expect anyone to be able to give a thorough response at this time because you've had the letters for a limited amount of time. And based upon what you have had an opportunity to peruse, do you have a statement that you'd like to make regarding the letters?
Thank you, Congressman Green, and again, Congresswoman Garcia and Congresswoman Fletcher. And I agree with your assessment, Congressman Green. In my direct conversations with Secretary Fudge of HUD, and my direct conversations with her, she indicated that she was awaiting the state action plan from GLO. And once she received the state's action plan, then HUD would then make a determination whether or not it was in compliance with their guidelines and rules and procedures. So she is waiting. In the letter that County Judge Lena Hidalgo and I sent to the Secretary just today, we are asking and requesting Secretary Fudge to put a timeline on when that amended action plan should be submitted. And we are asking that it be submitted to HUD within the next 30 days. Otherwise, GLO will drag this matter out, but the storms don't stop coming. So I agree with you. This letter, both of these letters contradict one another. I'm not going to spend a lot of time responding to the staff of GLO, and that's this letter of June 16, 2021. We will provide a more detailed written comments, but let me just say, for purposes of this, it is clear that GLO is saying we're going to give out of the $4.3 billion, we're going to give Harris County $750 million. Now you, Harris County, and you, City of Houston, you all fight over how those dollars should be distributed. That's a non sequitur. That's a non sequitur, and that should not be the case. They also say, if you read also in this letter, the HUD did not allow damage from Hurricane Harvey to be used as a matrix for allocating CDBG MID funding. The action plan was approved. That is not correct. When you look at the NOVA, read the NOVA, it specifically says that the funding should pretty much mirror the hazard mitigation grant funding, and that was 50% coming to Houston, Harris County. So factually, that statement is incorrect. And then on the second page, in the general sense, they are mixing the housing dollars into the infrastructure dollars. But what they don't say is that they control and approve all of the dollars as it relates to the housing housing allocation. So that's just mixing apples and oranges, and we need not get confused with that. So an amended action plan should be submitted. It should be submitted very quickly, and until that is done, HUD is really is waiting. And so the letters contradict one another. Thanks.
Same opportunity to you.
A very valid point. Just from a quick glance, here's another inconsistency. If I take the line that you quoted where it says, based on the amount of Hurricane Harvey damage suffered and overall population affected in Harris County, I, meaning Commissioner Bush, will be submitting an action plan amendment to give Harris County $750 million. Go back to the first letter in the second paragraph where he says, it's important to note that unlike CDBG block grant discovery, recovery, disaster recovery, HUD did not allow damage from Hurricane Harvey to be used as a metric for allocating MID funding. This is just a quick glance, but many of us obviously are lawyers. I mean, that's what you call a non sequitur. So you give money based on Harvey damage. You're going to give $750, but then you're saying that you were told by HUD. It's important to note they don't spell out which HUD. Was it the previous administration? Was it this administration? And the other point that's not laid out is they mix housing money with mitigation, flood mitigation money. There are a host of regulatory rules that GLO put in place on the city of Houston and Harris County. Even that issue of having to get a smaller home if you expanded the size of your home. but reams of paper that we have to follow for them. And that is what gave the city of Houston a problem, and that is what gave the county a problem as well. But we do know one thing. GLO has very limited experience as it relates to flood mitigation projects. But in short, Mr. Chairman, here would be my suggestion. Instead of anyone trying to cover up issues in a political environment, I would suggest that the land commissioner get in a room with the judge of Harris County, the mayor of the city of Houston, probably the secretary of HUD, and their key advisors. You don't need the army of us. I don't need to be what Hamilton say. I don't need to be in the room where it happens. But something ought to happen, because this is just unacceptable.
The chair will now yield to the gentlelady, Ms. Kamen, the same opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Congressman. I just want to point out, again, under a very brief review of the letter, that the GLO basically says that they plan to amend to request approval for a direct allocation to Harris County for $750 million. Here they are not mentioning the city of Houston, and in my opinion, they are in fact pitting the city against the county to fight over these dollars, rather than, again, as I pointed out earlier, following the models that they had previously done through the state, which is 25% and 25%. We have shown a united front, bipartisan front between the city and the county and working together. But again, I would point out the continuation of political posturing in holding these dollars over us.
Back. I will now yield to the gentlelady, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I think we all were maybe copying from each other, because I think we all highlighted the same things, and they're obvious and they stick out like a sore thumb. But I just want to make a note for the record that this letter was sent to us just today, as we had already begun the hearing, and it's signed by the chief clerk, deputy land commissioner, and not by the commissioner himself. And quite frankly, I don't know the hierarchy over there, but I'm disappointed that the commissioner did not appear, sends the letter, and it's not under his signature. And I'd like to make note for the record. And Mayor, I just wanted to ask you a question. I know that Judge Hidalgo and you both mentioned that they had offered to review the criteria, or you all had asked to review the criteria. Have they ever sat down with you to review the criteria that obviously is flawed if it resulted in us getting nothing? Have they ever taken the time? I mean, I think he's confused. He ain't the colonel with a secret sauce. He's a commissioner. He's got to be public and transparent and let us know how he put it together so that we can go back to HUD. Because when we talked to Secretary Fudge, she said it ain't a done deal. That's a direct quote. I was taking notes. And she also said that she would look at the formula. So have we seen the formula?
And Congresswoman, we wrote letters and spoke out publicly pointing out the fallacies of their matrix in 2019 and in 2020. We met with them in person in 2020 or 2019? In 2020, and again pointing out that their matrix was flawed and would work against Houston and Harris County. But they also then pivoted and wanted to talk about this second round. And if you notice, it's $4.3 billion coming to the state of Texas for Harvey recovery. But what GLO did is that they only siphoned off $2.1 billion for Harvey recovery, and then sending the other $2.2 billion elsewhere in this competitive formula. Well, all of it's competitive, but not knowing whether or not there was going to be a direct allocation. And as one of the commissioners, Republican commissioners, I may add, because this is a bipartisan objection to the allocation, indicated that the model was flawed from the very beginning. And the way it was set up, it was destined to lead to this end result. And I think what's making this so egregious and so glaring is that how can you give $0 to Harris County, $0 to the city of Houston, when we are talking about infrastructure that's needed as a result of Hurricane Harvey? I just don't see how you can rationalize that on any level. So yes, we pointed out to them
It was rigged from the beginning.
from the very beginning. This result was already predetermined.
Predetermined.
That was going to be 0.
Well, that is certainly very disappointing, because I think all of you are absolutely correct, and they're not shy about it, because they say it, that the money will be going to Harris County, and that it'll be, Harris County will be able to decide how much of that will go to the city of Houston and the Harris County Flood Control District. So they want us to get into a jurisdictional fight, and that's something we certainly want to avoid. But it seems like they're setting it up, and we need to resist. And Commissioner Ellis, I wanted to get back to you about the equity and impact to our low and moderate income communities and to our minority communities, because that is something also that the Secretary mentioned in our call, that she said that she would be looking at the impact to low and moderate communities, the impact directly to minority communities, and to unmet recovery needs. Those were the three things that she mentioned to us, which is what you all have been saying. So what else can we do to help you document any of these three areas? Or do you all feel like you've already got, the county's gotten your analysis done? I know the mayor's got his czar here with him. We all have done so much work, but is there anything else that we can provide in terms of assistance from our offices or from our direct contact with Secretary Fudge?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think inquiries like this today and putting the attention on it, and then obviously the direct contact that you all make with the Secretary and with her staff. We know that these decisions were made under the previous administration, where unfortunately I don't think the issue of equity was front and center. Look, we were pencil whipped with these formulas, but does anybody really think that with all of the talent in VITER and the number of smaller communities around the state, this is really complex stuff? The city really caught the formula challenges before we did at the county. And we hired 3 high-powered consulting firms. We were paying people to go through it. But at the end of the day, I think what you have is people coming up with a process to justify what they wanted to do. And it does appear as though there was a tremendous amount of political politics going into these decisions. And I think that's why our colleagues, in a bipartisan way, were outraged. So we just think it's best that we not pit our city and county against one another. There was an informal meeting where the city and the county had the understanding we get $1 billion each. $1.1 billion each. And when I went before the chairman's committee in Washington, I'm sorry, Congressman, if I took to hearing, I was making it a little too Harris County and Houston centric, but it was based on the percentage of money we got for housing recovery. And it would make sense that Congress would want to invest in protecting the very housing it replaced. Mm-hmm. And that was essentially from the city side that helped me walk through it. The point I'm making is this stuff is very complex. And I don't think I understood it when my team explained it to me. So I called Mike Costello, being an engineer. I said, can you tell me in English? Can you put your formal council person's hat on? Because I'm stressed in case somebody on Congressman Green's committee asked me the question. And it was the chair of the full committee that asked. So thank God he explained it to me in terms that I could explain. How do you justify thinking you get $1 billion each based on what they gave each one of us to replace housing? You'd want to protect it.
And Congresswoman, if I could just quickly say, in terms of you asked what can be done, if HUD's review is contingent on GLO filing a state amended action plan, and if there is no timeline by which when they should file it, then GLO can drag this thing out forever and ever and ever.
With letters.
With letters.
Do the plan.
And so what GLO is saying in their letters, we're waiting on HUD. HUD is saying we're waiting on the state action plan, the Minnesota Action Plan from GLO. But if there is no request by by HUD saying to GLO, you've made your pronouncements, you've indicated what you are going to be doing, you're going around to other jurisdictions saying what they will be getting, you should file your amended action plan now. Correct, because if
But
HUD is-
immediately.
But immediately,
Well,
otherwise
and
it'll drag
I'm
on
glad you
forever.
mentioned that, Mayor, which is why I mentioned the excerpt of the recommendations that the committee made at the time when I was the senator, is because most of the officials that testified before us talked about how they dragged their feet. And we were stunned. At that time, imagine, there was still money that had not been spent from Katrina and Rita and many, many, disasters past, because they do take a long time, and they do play the blame game. And, I had here for the record, and I'll submit it, Mr. Chairman, that HUD clearly said, and I quote, "The formula for allocation was created by the state of Texas. They have full responsibility and jurisdiction over who gets the money." But she has not finally approved it yet.
Yes.
So they've got to do their part, and then we'll commit to you. I'm sure that all of us will be in unanimity here to stay on Secretary Fudge, to give them a deadline, as you suggest, to get them to send in the information so that we can get this thing rolling, because enough is enough. So we thank you for testifying here today, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. We will now yield to Congresswoman Jackson Lee for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you very much, Council Member and Commissioner. Thank you to the Chairman and, of course, the co-chair of this, Congresswoman Garcia, and thank you to my colleague, Congresswoman Fletcher, and I'm delighted to be a co-host of this inquiry. Just to include in the record, again, when we were hit with Hurricane Harvey in 2017, I introduced H.R. 3686 that asked for $174 billion for impacted storm, for communities impacted by the storm and surrounding communities, including the state of Texas. In addition, I introduced H.R. 3990, which ultimately got in the bill the Small Business Hurricane Harvey Recovery Grants, which ultimately got in and actually saw $100 million come to the state of Texas for small businesses. So in working with my colleagues, I just want to put officially on the record and going to pursue this, since the DLO is writing us letters, that I would like to have an inventory of the distribution of those federal funds starting at the passage of the appropriations to be sent to all of the members on this inquiry, and certainly to all of the members of the Harris County congressional delegation. I'd like a distribution report of all the monies distributed. Number one, under the appropriations received pursuant to Hurricane Harvey, and number two, the particular sums of money that were distributed or supposed to be distributed under the Small Business Recovery Act. I understand that some jurisdictions, maybe even the city of Houston, have never received any small business recovery dollars. And so let me start with the mayor, first of all, to ask, how devastating is it for the city of Houston to be waiting now and asking for an amended petition, if you will, amended application to be sent on the precipice or on the edge of the upcoming 2021 hurricane season?
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for the question. I would tell you it's very devastating. These are infrastructure projects. It takes years. It takes years. And to give you some example, we identified 4 priority hazard mitigation grant projects. And I might add, under the 50% proportional funding we received. Those 4 projects have been approved by FEMA, fully funded, and we are moving forward. Those projects are in the design phase. Okay, from the North Canal, the West Houston, Kingwood, Inwood, Forest area, those dollars came in under the hazard mitigation grant funding. Okay, it takes years, on average 3 to 4 to 5 years. These are also infrastructure projects. The longer we wait, the longer it's going to take to get these projects constructed. We're in hurricane season now. It is unlikely any projects will be built in 2022 or 2023. And so the longer we wait, more people, especially in marginal communities who don't have the flexibility to uproot themselves and go someplace else, their lives are at risk. So we're not just talking about the loss of property, we're talking about the loss of human life.
And by the fact that we are entering into 2021, we don't know what the city, and I'll go to the county, will be facing with potential other natural disasters, in particular hurricanes, or as we experienced recently, an ongoing, consistent, and non-ceasing rain that causes flooding as well. I'm going to come back to you, Mayor, but let me to Commissioner Ellis know that we've been working on issues, again, by us collaborating with my colleagues, that stands up the issue even more. But again, if you might share with me the devastation as relates to Harris County, when we have to wait and wait and wait. You obviously have the Harris County Flood District, works with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have had to work on a number of issues. I remember having to remap White Oaks Bayou housing area where first came in, where everyone in that area, I think it preceded you, Commissioner, everyone in that area had to, in essence, move from their houses until we were able to work with the federal government to get it done. So the federal government can be affected. Biden administration is committed to building back. Secretary Fudge is committed to building back. A lot of what we're struggling with was the errors of the previous administration in allowing this process under GLO to go on and on and on. My question to you, the urgency of moving on the amended application and then the review so that dollars can flow.
City and county that have been disadvantaged the most would be Greens and Halls, which are in your district, and Sims. As you know, Congress stopped earmarks. They have reinstituted, but to a limited extent. The reason that Sims, back when the name was Chocolate Bayou, when I was a kid, was done was earmark, going back to Mickey Leland and Mike Andrews. So it's those three in particular. And it dovetails with that cost-benefit ratio issue.
Yes.
Bray's barely qualified, and so it's a tremendous challenge. Even with the $2.5 billion the county put up, with the drainage fee the city has done, I've seen estimates, I don't know how they justify them, $30 billion, I guess, and we'd be as comfortable or safe as they are in the Netherlands. I don't know what that's backed by. I won't trust it just because my friends in the engineering community say they need $30 billion. But look, this is it's a tremendous disadvantage, and those people had higher expectations because we did put equity language in the bond order, and we have tried to follow it. So we were waiting on this $1.1 billion that the county justifiably expected, so we could do in particular Greens and Halls. That's the third one that is not quite as LMI. And look, we all tie together because of what value is it for the county to widen the watersheds if the city doesn't have its resources to get the water from drainage in the city to the watersheds. And Congresswoman, I want to close on this point. I didn't want to bring it up earlier, but there's a letter where it says HUD did not allow damage from Hurricane Harvey to be used as a metric for allocating CDBG MIT funding. You can make the argument that Harvey wouldn't be used as the metric because Congress did, not knowing how far this money would go. You could include others, but it said could not be used as a metric. I know from all of the press accounts, everybody's seeing people in all of your districts devastated. This funding was all about Harvey. That's what it was about. So how could it not be a metric, but, you know, I hope we can resolve this quickly. I think it starts by the secretary, under the law, as I understand it, I may be wrong, she can't react to letters. They had a quiet handshake, understanding, you know, words matter, but maybe in the meeting, Mr. Costello, who was in the room, I believe, the mayor and the county judge were not, I'm told, when there's 1.1 billion for the city, 1.1 billion for the county, agreement was understood. Later, I'm told they said, well, this will be something we ought to consider. But we operated thinking we had 1.1 billion, and we filled out the applications. We didn't like the process, but this needs to be done as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Council member, our districts are contiguous to you. The question of the urgency, I think your district has aspects of Brays Bayou, and we know the Meyerland area, which my colleague represents, but I know that the Bayou goes through my district, so we are sort of connected. How urgent is it for you and your community?
As Mayor Turner said, we needed this yesterday. Project Brays is bringing relief, but thousands of homes were not only impacted by Harvey, but multiple floods preceding that, and then with Imelda, and again, the weather patterns we know are changing. We are seeing heavier rains, and we desperately need this funding now because, again, it takes so long to get them through the pipeline. Congresswoman Garcia, you had asked what we need, and I'll add to my colleagues, transparency. I myself, after we heard about the GLO's announcement, asked for a meeting because I have to be accountable to my constituents. I wanted to understand the formula, and I was told GLO staff is too busy to meet with Houston City Council on this. We would like transparency, and my other concern moving forward, this is $750 million that they're talking about out of a bucket of $4 billion. Again, I had spoken to the straying away from the model that had previously been used by the GLO and by TDEM of approximately 50% allocation between Houston and Harris County, and we are simply asking for the model to be followed.
If I can just continue very quickly, just to get this answer, Mayor, is $750 million enough? And I'm going to get a no across, and I just want to ask you on the inventory. Yes or no?
It is no.
Commissioner? No. Council member?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Costello cannot respond, but I know under his mask he's smiling. I do want to acknowledge the other council members that were here, Councilmember Jackson and Commissioner Garcia and the judge, and will not speak for them, but I know that you are a representative of them. I just want to ask the question for an answer about the importance of getting an accounting. I use the term inventory. Hurricane Harvey was particularly unique. In his letter, he indicated that the commissioner that there were 29 other counties to suggest that I've got a lot of work to do and I've got other counties. Do you believe it is important for us to have transparency, that there be an accounting, a report as to the distribution of these funds, including, and Mayor, you may tell me whether you ever received or can recall any small business dollars. Those dollars were supposed to come. I think you were supposed to have jurisdiction of them. We're not aware whether they did. Maybe they did. Maybe they were not enough. But if you could answer that, and you had another comment you wanted to make. Mayor Turner?
Congresswoman, there should be an accounting. And we are not even saying that those other 28 counties or 29 counties shouldn't receive any funding. They should. But it should be on a proportional basis. And the last thing I would say, one of the reasons why they said Houston-Harris County didn't need any more funding was because the people in Houston could pay more in taxes. What GLO said to us is that you all can raise more, you can increase your taxes and make up the difference.
That was not the intent of Congress.
Well, but what they also failed to realize, the city of Houston is under a revenue cap. So if the city of Houston is under a revenue cap imposed by the state, okay, in addition to the local, and if you're using that as a part of the elements, then why would the federal government provide the funding? period. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And we're simply saying, but for Hurricane Harvey and the impact on Houston and Harris County, the $4.3 billion would not be coming to the state of Texas. Now, don't use us, in a sense, to bring the dollars here, and then once the dollars get here, give Harris County zero and give the city of Houston zero. Or give us some small amount and then have us trying to figure it out, fight it out. That's not the way it should work. And quite frankly, the people who lose are the people who need the help the most. Those are the people who lose, because they're the ones who are getting flooded over and over and over again. And I think that's where we need to keep the focus on the people who are hurting are the ones who need these dollars the most.
Commissioner?
I would only add, Congresswoman, that everybody is for equity before they are against it. Everybody uses the word. I think that the Biden administration, Secretary Fudge, simply apply an equity analysis to this money as the proposed spending is out there. Rarely will we ever get enough money to do everything we know that we need to do. But it seems to me just common sense. You use the money for the people who have been neglected the most, who have the most problems. And this money coming through HUD in particular is the only federal money where there's some notion of LMI, or social vulnerability. The other money, most of the money, as Mr. Costello knows, that we go after is all tied to cost-benefit ratio, where you value the value of property over the lives of people. This money in particular is sacrosanct in that regard, and GLO did not apply that standard.
I know that Secretary Fudge and the Biden administration are really committed to social vulnerabilities, and they would welcome the emphasis of that as it may be submitted in the amended plan. I just want to add this on the record, that what I sense, Mr. Chairman, and co-hosts, co-chairpersons, is an urgent call by our local elected officials. The mayor has been very generous in the letter suggesting 30 days. I think it would be very important for the housing and urban development, at whatever level it is. There are a number of secretaries that handle this particular funding, deputies and assistant secretaries, but whatever level, that the department issue an urgent notice for GLO in 2021, 4 years after 2017, to urgently submit their amended plan. They erred, not the local officials. They did not submit their amended plan timely or before they distributed funds. Whatever it is not there. It needs to be there. So maybe we can join together and ask for an urgent request that is more urgent than 30 days. Because 30 days, this is the 11th, we'll be in July. And we know the pending hurricane season. The last point, Mr. Chairman, is, and I'll just get one answer from that, is if there is a question to the issue of direct allocation, what I perceive can be done is that in the amended plan, there can be designated sub-awards that your name can be in the plan. And so, because there's all kinds of things, and these are experts to the left, I'm not on financial services, but would you welcome that? Your name in the plan, your amount in the plan as it goes forward to Washington.
Direct allocation. This is not a healthy marriage.
Congresswoman, yes. Thank you all with the Biden, the latest round of funding. You did a direct allocation, and it was laid out that way in the legislation. I'm told the reason oftentimes the federal government won't do it, for counties in particular, is because they prefer to deal with 50 states than with various cities and counties around the country. But then you run into these equity issues, And it may be in other states as well, but particularly in this one, with the cultural wars we have going on between state government and local governments. We have the same problem. We don't have a self-imposed revenue cap, but the state has put it on us. You know, now we know if somebody gets angry, a couple get angry and don't show up, even if you're going to take the heat. I mean, we all know you don't win votes by raising revenue. I mean, you know, I learned that in kindergarten. That's a tough ask, but sometimes it's the right thing to do.
Well, we're very grateful to you for that, and I think I would like to send forward the desire for an urgent message going to GLO to move expeditiously, even shorter than the 30 days, if I think that is reasonable in light of where we are today, and to find the constructive legal position to take so that funding is included in the amended complaint with the names of Harris County and Houston on. Obviously, staff can work on that, but I would offer that so that if it is approved, it comes back with ready to go. And I thank you to both of you. Okay.
I assume that the gentlelady yields.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Do you desire to make a closing statement?
Are we
Yes, we're wrapping up. Do you have a closing?
very briefly?
I'll yield back to the lady.
Thank you so very much. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. Well, first of all, this was a very important effort this morning because there's nothing more important to representatives than to hear from their constituents and to be able to recount in hearings or working with the agencies, this is what our local leaders have told us. I am in full agreement that we're in an urgent posture. And I just want to need not remind the mayor of the work that had to be done dealing with the funding, the housing funding that was being handled by the city very effectively. But then, of course, there was an intervention by GLO that really disrupted your construction of important rebuilds. If you go throughout the city, we have tarps, we have people with some people with debris out in front of their house because the house is in a condition that they're still trying to fix it. And we have bayous that are in midstream of being repaired. So it's evident that we're doing everything we can. We're using the money efficiently. And all we need is a real viable partner. I will not call the other matter, but there's another major federal project that unfortunately the previous administration approved days before the new administration came in, which has put people in a quandary about how to fix that project. So we need to make sure that the GLO office is prepared to work with the new HUD, the new secretary, new various other staff persons, and that they can take advantage of that the HUD can be able to help them move their amended plan faster. That is my, I think, basis of this particular inquiry, what I've heard from all of the participants, and we as members of Congress, and I hope that this will be effectively bipartisan, that we are able to move this forward and to be able to have the counties and the cities handle their, and Harris County and Houston handle their own distribution by way of the amended plan. Thank you so very much. People are waiting, and I thank you so very much.
Gentlelady yields. We now yield to Congresswoman Garcia for closing.
Well, Mr. Chairman, mindful that you wanted and the goal was to finish at noon, I'll be brief. I just want to thank again all the officials that are here and all those that did attend. And I just wanted to make mention for the record that Commissioner Ramsey did indicate to us that he will submit testimony for the record in writing. We also heard from Senator Whitmire. He had a conflict, and he too will be submitting something in writing. And I just wanted, again, Mr. Chairman, to thank you for doing this. And I think the public should know that when it comes to saving lives, when it comes to making sure that our area, our region, our city, our county get their fair share of dollars, whether it's these dollars or any dollars, that this delegation will be united, and we will be here to fight to make sure that we get our fair, equitable dollars. And Commissioner Ellis, you're right. Everybody's for equity, everybody's for diversity, everybody's for inclusion, until later they find a reason why they can't do it. We're going to be here to make sure they do it. And you can count on us to work with the Secretary to make sure that Houston and Harris County are treated fairly. With that, I'll yield back and to the chairman, and thank you again.
Thank the gentlelady, and the record will receive the document when it is available to us. Let me close with this, dear friends. I started with the notion that this inquiry was crucial. We now understand why. It is critical. And the criticality has to do with the fact that the suffering is not really limited to Harris County and Houston, Texas, because until HUD submits the final amended plan, nobody gets any money. HUD has to approve the plan. The GLO must submit the plan. It appears to me that the commissioner, unfortunately, is playing games. And he's playing games with the lives of people who can ill afford to have this continue for a prolonged period of time. We have seen the suffering. We've heard the testimony of what the suffering actually is. It's time for the commissioner to do his job. He has to submit his amended plan to HUD. And until he does that, he is the person responsible for a lot of the suffering that we are witnessing. I would mention this to you. The timeline that you have mentioned, we have a piece of legislation, CDBG-DR's a disaster bill. Mayor, you have indicated you support that. We got it through Congress in the last Congress, and we plan to submit it again in this Congress. We'll be looking for letters of support for you in this Congress. Excuse me just a moment. Your conversation is bleeding over into the microphone. We'll be submitting it again in this Congress. We believe that this piece of legislation, as amended, will shorten these timelines and make sure that the monies don't get caught at the top and the end users deprived of dollars that Congress intended them to have in a much more expeditious fashion. This is just unacceptable. This hearing was called so that we could not only hear from you, but also develop a summary that we will submit to HUD to make the case not only for allocations now, immediately, but also we want amounts to be submitted to HUD. We've talked about equitable share. Equity is a great term, as has been indicated by Commissioner Ellis. But we need to have a specific amount to submit to HUD. We are going to fight for you and with you. This makes no sense to allow this to continue without a concerted effort. So we want dollar amounts. And you may submit additional documents for the record, and we will take those documents and use them as well. But we do want to submit this to HUD, and we also will submit it to the Financial Services Committee. Congresswoman Garcia and I sit on the committee. We will be making the case in hearings in the future, not only for the circumstance that we're negotiating currently, but also to make sure that Houston can get direct allocations. Houston has a vast accounting department. Houston is not a city without the resources to manage large amounts of money. So we are going to make the case. I don't know what the judgment will be, but I can tell you that the effort will be there to get Houston, Harris County direct funding. And finally, this. This was not an easy hearing for us to pull together. Commissioner Ellis, I want to thank you for encouraging us to do it. And I say not easy because the timelines for everybody was difficult to match up. Everybody has something to do. Mayor, you were supposed to be someplace else. Thank you for being here. The county judge was not supposed to be able to make it, but she did. People have other things to do, but I respect all of you for taking the time to be here today. Commissioner Adrian Garcia had a prior engagement. Everybody has other things to do, but I respect you for being here today. I am grateful to you, Councilwoman, for taking the time as well. This was an important hearing, and it probably won't be the last because we have to continue the effort to make sure all of our people, our constituents, are treated fairly. With this said, we will bring this hearing, this inquiry. In each place where I have said hearing, have the record reflect that I would have it be inquiry. This inquiry is now closed. microphone live? Yes, sir. It is live. Okay. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Okay. I'm getting a bit of feedback. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Okay, I'm just checking the mic. Any feedback on your end? You're good? Did we lose the mayor? Well, he told me he was late because I kept him longer than I anticipated. What time do you have? Get a sense of how long.
12:18.
Okay, it's not bad. I assume we're still waiting for the light before we start. We're good.
We do have one at a speeding station. Then they do a pull the side with me out. If you wait until you're standing where I'm standing, this directly.
Is that good?
All right. Let me thank all of the members of the press for coming to this crucial and critical inquiry. We believe that what we've done today lays a foundation for what we will do to help Houston and Harris County receive its just amount of funds for Harvey. It's important for us to thank persons who were here. The mayor was here and had to leave, but we appreciate his being here, and he took up more time than we anticipated. The county judge was here and had to leave as well. Commissioner Adrian Garcia likewise came and had to leave. There were city council persons here who could not stay longer. All of these persons we appreciate, Senator Whitmire indicated that he wanted to be here and could not make it. I want to thank my colleagues who are here with me. Each will be introduced in just a moment after I make a very brief statement. The hearing was called so that we could acquire the intelligence necessary to make the case for proper funding for Harris County and the City of Houston. We believe that the testimony that we've received has made the case. The record is still being left open for additional testimony. We plan to summarize the hearing, and we plan to submit this summary to the House Financial Services Committee as well as to HUD. We plan to ask, as Congresswoman Jackson Lee has indicated, and we have planned to do, we plan to ask HUD to appropriate a specific dollar amount for Houston and for Harris County. We don't believe that the nebulous terminology that's been utilized is sufficient. We see that things are happening in contravention of HUD policy and, quite frankly, what may be in contravention of law. And as a result of these things that we are seeing, we believe that it's time for us to take appropriate action so that we can redress the harm that's already been caused and prevent additional harm from being imposed upon the citizens of Houston, Harris County. But we should all remember this. It's not just Houston and Harris County that suffers with HUD's inaction. The money can't be delivered to the end users until GLO submits its amended action plan to HUD. GLO has written a letter indicating, as I read it, that it has not sent that plan, but will submit that plan. I would submit that after the time that has lapsed, GLO is woefully late and should have submitted the plan. And that if the plan is not submitted, I believe that we have to ask that HUD take action on its own initiative, ab initio, as we would say in the law, that it take action and that it would make sure that the people in Houston, Harris County get the just amount of money that the Congress obviously intended Houston and Harris County to receive, and HUD has so much as indicated such in a memo that I've received. Finally, I want to thank Commissioner Ellis especially, because he called to my attention on more than one occasion that we needed an inquiry of this type. I thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your persistence because it was for a worthy and noble cause, something that you're known for. At this time, I'm going to introduce my colleague who serves on the Financial Services Committee with me. She also serves on Judiciary. She is a very dutiful and meaningful and mindful steward of our tax dollars. She is the person that I work closely with to bring this event to fruition. I present now and ask that she would give her comments, the Honorable Sylvia Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I did want to make note that Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher was here during the hearing but had to leave for another commitment. I'll start there, Congressman. You know, I've been watching dollars, I think you all know, since I was city controller. I watched them when I was a county commissioner. As a state senator, I've been through a lot of storms, a lot of disasters. This is the first time that any formula, any matrix, any guideline would result in the city of Houston and Harris County getting zero, nada, zilch. You can ask any person on the street today who had a lot of damage, who should be getting the money, and they would certainly say that Houston and Harris County deserve some of that money. So that's what this is about. We are here to unified to urge the commissioner to submit the plan, and I would urge him to do it before the end of this month, so that we can get the ball rolling, because we've been waiting too long. And I think that he needs to do his job. He knows about this. He's been working on it. I'm disappointed he's not here today. I'm disappointed that the letter we got from his office wasn't even signed by him. And I'm especially disappointed when I hear from some of our officials that one of the responses from his office, I don't know if it came directly from him, but it came from his office, that, well, we know that you all can raise taxes in Houston. Now, that is just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous to tell our folks who suffered the most, well, it's okay because now you all can raise taxes. That's not what this is about. This is about the damage, the need, and making sure that people recover. So I urge the commissioner, to submit the plan by the end of this month so that we can get the ball rolling. Enough is enough. Y ahora unas cuantas palabras en español. Aquí estoy con todos los funcionarios. Le doy las gracias al congresista Green y a la congresista Sheila Jackson Lee. También estaba aquí presente con nosotros la congresista Lizzie Fletcher y tenemos los oficiales del condado. Aquí estaba Lina Hidalgo. Teníamos aquí el alcalde. Aquí estaba también el comisionado García y está aquí con nosotros el comisionado Ellis. Todos unidos, porque cuando es una cosa de las emergencias que tenemos aquí, todos tenemos que estar unidos para estar seguros que recibimos los fondos que merece nuestra área para poder a levantarlos y para poder a seguir adelante. La fórmula que hizo el comisionado Bush no lo podemos aceptar, porque resultó que nosotros aquí en Houston y Harris County recibimos nada, ni un níquel, que es ridículo, porque ya sabemos que nuestra área tenía mucho daño, muchas personas sufrieron, perdieron sus casas, así es que necesitamos los fondos y los necesitamos pronto. Así es que yo le pido al comisionado Bush que hagas el plan para el fin de este mes para poder recibir los fondos inmediatamente y más pronto. Así es que aquí estamos con todos reunidos en la misma estrategia, ¿no? Para poder resultar con los fondos que merecemos. No queremos quebrar la línea, no queremos nada especial. Queremos lo que debemos de recibir igual como todos. Así con eso le pasamos el micrófono a la congresista Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me have just a word in bringing up Congresswoman Jackson Lee. I neglected to mention Congresswoman Fletcher, who's a co-host, and you did, but I want to acknowledge that she has played a significant role in what we've been able to produce. She has been a team player, and it means a lot to have her on the team. Now I'd like to bring up Congresswoman Jackson Lee, who is a co-host of this event as well. She's not on the Committee of Jurisdiction as it relates to HUD, but she's in the fight. And it seems to me that it matters little as to which committee you're on if you're in the fight. She is in the fight, and I welcome her comments at this time. The Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you for having this inquiry and the opportunity for the members of the Harris County delegation, two of whom happen to be on the Financial Services Committee, to convene this inquiry, of which I am delighted to be a co-host. Thank you to the leadership of both Congresswoman Garcia, and Congressman Green, and they will have the ability to do a deep dive on the Financial Services Committee. Again, my acknowledgement of Congresswoman Fletcher, who has joined and worked as well with all of us, and Commissioner Ellis, Commissioner Garcia, Councilmember Kamen, and Robinson, and Jackson, who were here as well, our housing representatives, all of these individuals, and Commissioner Ellis, Judge Hidalgo, represent the intensity of this issue. So first of all, let me say we should have put an empty chair so that the absence of the General Land Office could have been conspicuous. As a state officer that represents everyone, Republicans and Democrats, independents and otherwise, Texans, no matter what language you speak, what neighborhood you're in, the General Land Office should have been present to provide the transparency and factual basis for, as my colleagues have said, zero funding. I think in the tenure that I've been in the United States Congress, I have never seen an announcement of zero from the Housing and Urban Development, no matter whether the president at the time was Republican or Democrat. Hurricane Ike, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when we took 250,000 people from Louisiana into the state of Texas. I remember specifically George W. Bush calling then Governor Perry and saying, you need to take these people, meaning that in the course of a disaster, the Republican president called at that time a Republican governor. There was no litmus test for who was coming from Louisiana. It was just, you need to open your doors to these people. Americans are coming. And in Houston, Americans in Harris County desperately were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. And just as a brief memory lane, I was at George R. Brown for 7 days. But the stories in our neighborhoods, what about a group of survivors that were on a little elevation of a gas station? They couldn't get out. That is where they wound up because of all the water around. The tragedy of losing families, certainly a family in my area that swept away in a bayou, or the officer that Commissioner Hidalgo talked about. There was death in Hurricane Harvey. There was sadness, and there were people who were barbecuing their meal outside their house. There were food giveaways. This was preceding food trucks. And people were opening their restaurants, and people were eating their breakfast, their lunch, their dinner. Does the GLO understand the pain that Harris County went through? And so the zero is penetrated in my head. Also, the inconsistency of the formula when HUD and the law focuses on social vulnerabilities, which are the many neighborhoods that we have spoken about. So this inquiry was crucial for us to frame our next step. I think it is important that our collective voice encourages HUD to instruct the General Land Office to expedite their plan, to move their plan and move heaven and earth, to be able to work day and night, to, as my colleague said, to get the plan in before the end of June. And then at the same time to work with HUD to construct the award that then is in the plan. And in the United States House, we have something called self-implementing. So once the comment period goes, HUD reviews, HUD approves, the immediate approval of that plan, the distribution of dollars comes to Harris County and Houston. That is how it must come, the immediate distribution of funds upon the approval of the plan. We have a cooperative administration in the Biden-Harris administration. We have an energized Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Madam Secretary Fudge, who comes from an urban area and is very sympathetic and has been in contact with all of us to say how they can help. In the backdrop, as I close, it is certainly not this press conference to speak of spying on members of Congress. But in the last administration, approvals and reviews were given without any engagement with members of Congress. That is their protocol, as they spied on members of Congress. We have a new day now, and we have a cooperative, collaborative administration that wants to work with us. I say to the GLO, if you're ready to stand up and get the job done, the Biden administration, Secretary of Housing, Urban Development will work with you and work with us to get the dollars back to our community. And thank you all very much for your leadership.
And now we will hear from the person that I introduced earlier when indicating that he was persistent, insistent, that we have this inquiry. I will just simply say one additional word. His presence in government will be known by the work that he has done. It is across the length and breadth of the area that you can see his work. I'm honored to introduce and ask our colleague, the Honorable Rodney Ellis, to have comments.
Thank you, Congressman Green and Mr. Chairman. Only your leadership, along with your co-convener, Congresswoman Garcia, and of course Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, could get the mayor, the county judge, 2 county commissioners, 3 council members here. I know Commissioner Ramsey is going to submit testimony, so thank you for what you're doing. Thank you all, the entire delegation, for fighting to get this funding after Harvey for Harris County, Houston, the entire state of Texas. It was very important. Look, everybody else has said it. I don't have to repeat it. I'll just give you one analogy. Could you imagine after Katrina, if the federal government gave money to the state of Louisiana and whatever metrics they dreamed up, they would give nada, nothing to New Orleans? People would be rioting in the streets. And I think that's why you saw the bipartisan outrage after this. I want to make the point that it is not just about Houston and Harris County, by the way. Congresswoman Garcia, I really do believe equity ought to be more than just a 6-letter word that oftentimes people treat like a 4-letter word, might I add. That's why I made reference to the provision I saw in the complaint from Texas Housers. Could you imagine Jefferson County? I think, go check it, I may be wrong. I thought I read it was Port Arthur that got the largest amount of rain. Congressman Green, Mr. Chairman, we were sending stuff that came into us to Jefferson County. Our hearts went out because Houston and Harris County, we were all over the international news, but in Port Arthur and Jefferson County, how could you not give a dime to Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Jefferson County? There's something wrong with the process. They stated it clearly what we want. Mr. Chairman, it's pretty much what's in your bill, which I'm going to make sure that the county, I'm going to make the case that we should support it. We want a direct allocation. We shouldn't be in a position where the GLO is micromanaging it, because then we get into fights. I hope HUD would take a good look at the administrative fees. You think, I can't remember the number, it might be $350 million. If they taken $350 off the top to figure out how to administer it, and this is what they administered, if they don't think we could do the flood projects, well, they could go do them. But don't deprive the people in Houston and Harris County, because there may be some political animus towards any of us in Harris County, Houston. We can get over that. We don't have to like one another. We don't have to support one another. Let's all support and show we love the people that we all represent. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. I'm now honored to bring up the chairperson of the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee for the City of Houston. She has hit the ground running, and not only has she done an outstanding job in terms of what she's simply done for constituents, and I enjoy working with her, to be very candid with you. She is a very pleasant person to work with, but she's also a very hard worker who wants to get results. And her work didn't start when she became a member of council. She was working in the community long before she became a member of council. And I do want to congratulate her for helping us to increase our voting population here in Harris County, Houston, Texas. I will now ask the Honorable Abby Kamen to give our comments.
Thank you, Chairman Green and Congresswoman Garcia, for co-hosting this along with my councilwoman, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and Congresswoman Fletcher, who also represents a significant portion of the district I represent that has been flooded not just by Harvey, but multiple floods over and over again. I want to also recognize, as the city elected official here, not only Mayor Turner for his leadership, but my colleagues who joined us today, Councilwoman Tarsha Jackson and Councilmember David Robinson, who chairs our Transportation Technology and Infrastructure Committee. Houston and Harris County not only make up close to half of the statewide losses during Harvey, we are the only major city that has experienced consecutive flooding disasters, making the dollars that we're discussing today vital for us to build back stronger and more resilient. The state's intentional, and that's the only way to describe what has happened, intentional efforts to deprive Houstonians of billions of dollars specifically designated for areas hardest hit by Harvey is indefensible. No matter which way we slice it and look at the numbers, the formula that GLO used this time does not add up. As you've heard today, our constituents do not care whether flood relief comes from the state, the county, the city. What matters is that they are not mired in an unjust situation. The state cherry-picked numbers so that Houston would be excluded from these allocations. And I'm extremely concerned about the thousands of families that are being harmed by the state's decision to withhold critical infrastructure. We've talked a lot about housing and those opportunities, but these infrastructure dollars help large areas that are continuing to flood. And these are the funds that these are the people that these funds are supposed to help. So as chair of Houston's Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, and even more so as a Houstonian, I find myself once again holding our breath as we start hurricane season. Remember, we're already into hurricane season, multiple years after Harvey. And the longer we delay because of politics, the longer we will remain in harm's way. And we're already on borrowed time. So to our congressional delegation for Houston and Harris County, thank you for standing up for us, for making sure our communities are not forgotten, and for making sure that we have action for the residents of Houston. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will remove my mask and apologize for not having worn it when I was not at the microphone. I regret that someone didn't pull my coat, as they would say. But thank you so much for tolerating me. Let me close with this before we take the questions. Someone indicated earlier that this system that was put in place was rigged to receive a desired result. I cannot disagree. It appears that the deck was stacked, that the determination was made, as I said, ab initio, at the inception, as to what would be the consequences for Houston and Harris County. I cannot give a rationale for it, but the actions seem to connote this was the direction that was intended from the genesis of the process. So I'm very much concerned about it, as all of us are. But we're doing more than simply being concerned. We're taking affirmative action so that we can bring about some change. With this said, we welcome questions from the press.
You've been very outspoken against the previous administration. Do you think that has something to do with like a retaliation against maybe a mostly Democratic city and county?
I think that it's difficult to say why, but I also believe that it's difficult to rule this out. I don't know why we would get a letter that references another letter, and the letters contradict each other. It makes no sense. A lot of what's happening here simply makes no sense. The allocation of no money to a county that was the hardest hit, a county wherein we had trillions of gallons of water, and this was across the area, but concentrated in Harris County, it just makes no sense. So I'm not going to say that this was the reason why, but I will say that I don't see how you can rule it out as you consider the multiplicity of reasons that might exist. And I would hope that the commissioner would rethink what he's doing and pursue a more just and equitable course of conduct for Houston-Harris County. Thank you.
Congresista García, ¿piensa que esto es un ataque directo a la gente de menos recursos, muchos de ellos hispanos?
Bueno, pues no creo que es directamente en contra de los latinos, ¿no? Es en contra de la ciudad y el condado, que si se fija uno quiénes son los líderes, pues sí son, una es latina y otro es afroamericano, ¿no? Pero más importante también, el condado y la ciudad votaron muy fuerte demócratas, ¿no? Así es que todo eso es la política que está, yo creo que Bush está haciendo estas decisiones por la política, no para la ayuda de la gente. Pero a todos modos no es la primera vez. Hemos tenido este pleito, ¿no? Después de Hurricane Ike y otros huracanes. La cosa es esto, que no ha habido ninguna emergencia huracán que cuando ya van a dar los fondos, que no le dan nada a Houston. Esta es la primera vez, y ya me conocen, yo he estado en la política y en el servicio público por muchos años. Es la primera vez que lo hemos visto y es la primera vez que tienen esta fórmula que no los quieren enseñar, no los quieren explicar. Así es que es tiempo que el comisionado haga su trabajo y responde al público a cómo hizo esto y hacer los cambios necesarios en su plan para que ya la gente recibe, para que la ciudad y el condado reciban los fondos. Y lo necesita hacer inmediatamente. Yo le pido que lo haga para el 30 de junio, el fin de este mes.
Congresista, brevemente en español, ¿cuál es el propósito de la reunión de hoy? ¿Esto se va a llevar al Congreso para que haya como un expediente de alguna manera? ¿Qué va a pasar si esos fondos no llegan al final a Harris y a la ciudad de Houston? ¿Puede proceder el Congreso de alguna manera?
No, eso sí no lo vamos a aceptar. Necesitamos que el plan incluye a Houston y el condado de Harris. Todos los congresistas estamos unidos en esto, así es que vamos a hacer todo lo posible. Ya tenemos una secretaria nueva de HUD. No, recuerden que el plan y una de las cosas que pasó antes era cuando había otra persona como secretaria secretario, era el señor Carson en HUD. Así es que esta secretaria ya los aseguró que ella va a ayudarlos, ella va a review el plan, va a review la fórmula y va a hacer todo lo posible para asegurar que sí recibimos el dinero que merecemos aquí en Houston y el condado de Harris.
Any other questions? Well, again, we thank you for being here, and we trust that the message that you will take to the masses will make a difference in the lives of the people that we serve. Thank you much. The press conference is over.